Imagine a parasite, like a face hugger, that commandeers all your resources for its purposes and ultimately destroys you in making itself. In the movie Alien, the face hugger would tighten its tail around the host's neck, threatening to strangle it in the face of any attempt at surgical removal. There is a multifaceted attack on your freedom of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And the parasite on the receiving end of your louche, time, and labor product will not only strangle you personally, in a sense physically, through the threat of institutionalization if you attempt to remove it, but also this facehugger has interfaced with your nervous system to make you feel its pain. Like when someone takes a scalpel to this facehugger, it not only tightens its tail around the host's throat, but also causes the host to feel the pain of being cut because this parasite has grafted, hardwired its nervous system into that of the host. Like the malicious programming of the narrative. That's what I'm talking about. It's the fundamental theorem of making you do what's against your long-term best interest at every decision point, which I refer to in a recent video, which I've linked in the description. That programming defends itself by the way it's implanted as an identity in the host. At every juncture where the host could be encouraged to take their own side, the prospect of it threatens their narrative programmed identity, the alignment with which defines what's a good person in their conditioned eyes. It's the same thing that's at play in the supposed Mark Twain quote that it's easier to convince someone of a lie than it is to convince them that they have been lied to. The truth of this statement stems from the identification of the individual with the information that they have taken in as fact, albeit wrongly. Information is accepted on a first-come, first-served basis, as I've said over and over again, and as evidenced by the geographical distribution of ridiculous ideas over which people kill. People kill each other over what are essentially malicious chain letters that have gone down through the centuries, dogmas about unprovable events and realities. So to go against this programming offends what it means to be a good person. But the thing is, there are no good people anyway, especially not by the narrative's definition, which relegates such to a behavioral pattern of suicidal altruism, suicidal empathy, and unreciprocated tolerance that can't persist for more than a couple of generations because it leads to the atomization and unraveling of the targeted people. The narrative tricks people into seeing as evil in themselves the very insularity that's permitted, even encouraged in their dispossessors, both those above them at the system control level and those up and coming slated to replace them. It's literally rules for me that hamstring and handicap me, but not for thee, who can observe an insularity that allows them to gain advantage within the system. The narrative ascribes nobility to the identity that cucks itself. The parasite dispossesses the host of their wealth, identity, and independence from the institutions that control the livestock of the human farm. To even speak of the specifics of these things could bring a tightening of the stranglehold on the speaker to the extent that the speaker is beholden to the system for sustenance. And to speak against the narrative brings a pain reaction within the brainwashed listener, the useful idiot who has been programmed to identify with it. It is spliced into the host's nervous system such that to hear words that contradict it causes pain, possibly rage, and a compulsion to flee from or attack the speaker. Like there are people, many older ones, who were conditioned by the narrative at a time when the information outlets were too few to be independent of the narrative's authors. Whole generations of Westerners were force-teamed by hypnotic conditioning through a box that puts their brain into an alpha wave state, opening them to suggestion to act against their long-term self-interests by a programmed inversion of what was previously considered wisdom. These generations Watch the television shows and movies that vilify the archetypes that in reality protect the innocent. If you examine the narrative, you can see how it takes us to a place where the innocent are in no way protected from the arbitrary evil that flows from the denizens of our corrupt institutions, as well as the human debris that is their product. Like I've said before about how the TV shows from the 80s and beyond consistently portrayed the father figure as either an evil abuser or a bumbling idiot, and all of those on the receiving end of said abuse are portrayed as vulnerable people of various kinds, full of nothing but altruism, goodness, and wisdom. I've personally seen this programming play out in real life. You can see those who are aggrandized by the narrative projecting their notions of superiority and self-righteousness over the narrative's targets. But they themselves are the targets. They've just been programmed to not see it. So that's a bit about the subtle aspect of the narrative and the intentions of its controllers. But the physical aspect I have touched on this channel as well. Controllers of the narrative are also the controllers of the money supply, and through that, it is not well understood the amount of mischief that can be brought to bear. When people complain about rising prices, it's not greedy corporations, as the politicians say. Those politicians are owned by the authors of the narrative. No, it's not greedy corporations. It's just the relationship between the amount of money in circulation, the amount of currency in circulation, rather. Money is gold and silver. What we call money is really just debt. So this price inflation, it's just the relationship between the amount of currency in circulation and the amount of goods available, goods and services available to purchase it. And that is 100% a function of debt, as money is created through lending, or rather currency is created through lending. It's lent into existence. There is a wholesaler of money. It is the Fed, and the Fed is controlled by very specific people, as are the institutions that program the narrative into the minds of people. My advice relative to the money supply is that you should, at this point, treat your currency like ice cubes that are going to melt if you don't get them converted into something that won't. And of course, the narrative wants you atomized and spiritually inverted. There's strength in numbers. It's good to be somehow in a community, something mutually supportive, something small enough to allow for accountability, something within, say, Dunbar's number. Something that will also react in a powerful way when an injustice is committed against one of its members. This is what the parasite fears, our ability to be freely and also exclusively associated with one another, to represent our own interests the same way that they do, without shame and without threat to our identity. But beyond this, a disconnecting of one's senses from the outlets through which the narrative is delivered. It is absolutely essential. If you think about it, the narrative has influence over everything that receives money. If you're getting money for something, your rebellion against the narrative can cause that money stream to dry up. The parasite can tighten its tail around your neck. That's why it's hard to trust a YouTube channel that relies on some kind of sponsorship. It could be connected to the bigs, so to speak, and once they catch wind of any dissent, they just cut off the money supply. So unless those sponsors are themselves aligned against the narrative and living in a parallel economy, so to speak, they ultimately can't be trusted to protect speech. We'll never win against the narrative so long as we're giving them our attention and thus accepting their ideas unconsciously on a first-come, first-served basis. They want things corrupt because, as I've said, corruption expands the scope of what money can purchase. And since they control the money spigot through which it is lent into existence, they want money to be the deciding factor of all things. It's what they control. And they have their cronies positioned closest to the money spigots, where it's most valuable when it first comes out, before it loses its purchasing power, by the time it's diluted and gets to us wage cucks. It's not only the disconnecting of the senses from the narrative's outlet for conditioning, but also the destruction of the propensity to be identified with information in general, unconsciously identified rather. This is accomplished through spiritual practice, through realizing the non-self nature of dependently originated phenomena in an experiential way that leaves one as master of their own louche, both in its expansiveness and vibrational level, to ascend From this unencumbered way of being, there is more clarity of seeing and more energy to bring to bear to every occasion. There's also a filling of that inner void with a palpable love that is known to be the product of alignment with truth. And in such, there is no neediness that can make one beholden to something so destructive as the narrative. It destroys any fawning over such denizens. The North Star of spirituality is presence, the ability to be content in the mundane without the need to elevate consciousness through outside levers. Presence is as simple as be here now, but to be persistently that way is elusive. It's not a matter of accomplishing something great. It's just an ability to be still, to be here now by virtue of there being no delusion that gives impetus for fearing for things that are of a non-self nature. This channel is not a current events channel, although the things of which I speak do seem to find bearing on what's happening occasionally. But if you listen to these videos, I continuously point to this unveiling of the absolute truth through the dispelling of ignorance. That's all for now.